prophecy. God looks good on me and I'm rising above every limitation. Okay, so where do I begin? When I look at my life, I really think that it's something out of a fantasy. It's almost like it's unbelievable, and sometimes I have to look at my past and remind myself where I came from to get me through a certain day or a certain feeling. It's always God reminding me where I came from. And so I'll start at the beginning. I was raised in a pastoral household. My dad was a pastor, my mom is a pastor and a singer. She sang gospel music for 30 years now. My dad was a pastor in Kenya 30 years. And so I grew up in a very religious environment, pastor's kid and all that stuff. And you know how they say pastor's kids are like the most rebellious, or yeah, that does not apply to me. In fact, I had the complete opposite of a childhood. So the only problem with how I grew up was that I grew up in a very toxic environment. My dad was a pastor, but he was also physically abusive and emotionally as well. So I witnessed a lot of violence at such a young age. And for me, it's really different how I saw my dad versus how my siblings saw my dad was very different. I thought my dad was my hero because from a very young age, it's like it was just me and him against the world. And I never wanted to face the fact that he could be that kind of monster. I wasn't ready to look at him that way. He made me feel seen, he made me feel loved, which looking back at it was actually some kind of manipulative tactic, some kind of grooming. But at the time, I'm a young girl, I'm a little girl, and because he favored me so much, it almost isolated me from the rest of the family. I remember I never felt like I could really talk to anyone else. I only felt like I had my dad, and he would always spoil me, so I was a little daddy's girl. He would always buy me gifts if he hurt my feelings or if he did something that, blew back on me, or if I saw him get violent with my mom. He would always, maybe buy me a new phone, take me out to dinner. So he would always cover up his actions with materialistic things. And so I grew up understanding that I don't have to actually face who I truly am. I learned from him that I can just be a hypocrite and, just hide behind a curtain. And so that was most of my childhood as a young girl. And as I started to grow older, I started to see that I missed the bond with my siblings. I wanted them to love me. I wanted them to see me because they were so close. And I'm the youngest of three. My siblings are 4 years older than me and 1 year apart from each other. So I have a big sister and a big brother. And then 4 years later, I showed up. And so the impact of the toxic environment for them was quite different from what I experienced. So from them, it was more like a rebellious situation. They were more, they didn't really care. And because the thing about abuse is that you can either become a victim or the abuser, or you can just decide to become somebody that, or you're going to ignore it. You don't want to face it. You're just going to live life that it doesn't really impact you, but it does. And so they tried to run away from home so many times. And they were rebellious, and they used to, just do their own thing. And for me, because they did that, and I'm not bashing them, they're my siblings, I love them. But because they acted out in that way, the spotlight was now shifted to me. And so I was now acting out of performance. All my childhood, I remember that I felt like because they were like that, I can't afford to do this, or I'm gonna lose daddy's love, or he's not gonna spoil me anymore, he's gonna he's gonna start hitting me. And for me, it was like, I don't want to ever be on the receiving end of what my dad turned into. Like, if he turned into that violent person, I never wanted to be on the receiving end. So I was an angel. And so the perfectionism started to form at a very young age. I remember I used to snitch on my siblings because I wanted to gain more favor from my dad. I would tell, Purity and Daniel, and they're going out and they're meeting boys and stuff and they're drinking, and they would always get punished and I would be there laughing. But that created a disconnect between me and my siblings. So I remember just living out of perfection because I felt like that was the only way I could earn love from my dad. It was very conditional. And so I never had a bond with my mom. I love my mom, but we never really came to a place where it was just me and her. And so as I started to grow up, I started to see my dad, and it became harder to ignore the fact that he was a huge narcissist who just used what looked good on paper as a perception to fool everybody else. And he would, do things at home that made me feel like I'm the queen of this house. Like, I used to feel like my mom didn't even matter. That's how he used to treat me. And so growing up, it got harder for me to look at him the same, because I would hear things from my mom and she'd tell me, okay, be careful around him. I don't like the way he looks at you, all these things. And I'd be like, but what do you mean? Like, that's my dad. And I never understood it at the time, but it clicked at the back of my head because I saw that he was unstable. And so I remember the opportunity I had that I was given to go to boarding school. I was literally 9 years old. And my mom, I'd been jumped from system to system. My dad had taken me from the Kenyan system to a British system to an American system. So I did not have a stable education. And so when my mom finally took back control of my education and kind of taking care of me, we went to this school and they had an option to be a boarder. Like, I could literally live in school. And because I wasn't actually mentally capable to even be in a place to really understand or want to even understand what was going on at home, I was like, yes, I want to be in boarding school. I don't want to be in that environment. It was constantly violence, constantly blame game, we could not communicate with each other. It was just constantly yelling. So there's so much violence, there's so much miscommunication, dysfunction that occurred that I didn't want to be there anymore. And so the first opportunity I got at 9 years old, I went to boarding school. If you know anything about boarding school in Kenya, is that it's definitely something that's not a joke. The kind of boarding school that I went to was a private school, but really it wasn't different from a public school. If you're from Kenya, you understand what I'm saying. And so at first I was with my sister for like a month, and then she got out, she moved to another school. So I was alone in boarding school, but she had gotten me into the gist of things, like what to do, how to wake up, how to brush your teeth, how to wash your socks, And so when I started now getting into the hang of things, I remember I used to, because of the way I communicated on what I learned, because it's all I knew at home, right? Like that's all like shouting is the only way you know how to communicate. And because my dad had taught me that I should get everything I ever want, I was a little spoiled kid, like, I'm not gonna lie. And so when I went into boarding, I would always demand things from people. And if you didn't give me this, then we're not friends, or then I'm gonna hit you, or I'm gonna be violent with you. Like, who do you think you are to say no to me? And so fast forward, it got to a point where I couldn't make any friends. A lot of people didn't like me, and so I started to get bullied. And the bullying kept going. After my parents split, they were all over the newspapers because they're pretty well known in Kenya. And so the newspapers came to our school, and I saw this one time I came to the library and everyone was just like surrounding the newspaper area, just having like little whispers and stuff like that. And as soon as I came in, they looked at me, and when I went to look at the newspaper, it was my dad and my mom splitting, and my dad was saying all these things about my mom, like, oh, she slept with the houseboy, she did this and this and this, which none of it was true. But he had that kind of influence, so a lot of people believed him. And so my mom did not retaliate, she did not say anything, she literally just kept quiet. And when people saw that, they started to, kind of make fun of me. And it's like everything that I had tried so much to avoid came like flooding back. I remember one day the emotion I was feeling was actually indescribable. I did not understand what was going on. I didn't even have the emotional capacity to understand what was going on. And so when the bullying kept going, they make fun of me and they're calling me names, and it got to a point where in grade 5, this is now a year later, in grade 5, one morning I went to class, I got ready and everything. But that day was different because I was going through a very hard time emotionally. I didn't know what was happening to me. And so that morning, it's like that impulse decision. Because if you know anything about depression, you know that you're very impulsive. Like you actually don't know why you want to do something, you just want to do it. You don't want to even want to think, you don't even want to think about it, right? And so that was me. So I went to class in the morning. I was crying all the way there, and I sat at my desk and I just kept crying. Literally nobody looked, nobody cared, and this just confirmed, like I was like, okay, this is a confirmation that I'm really unlovable, I'm useless, like people don't really see me. And so I kind of went to the bathroom. In Kenya we have like these geometrical sets. I'm sure you have them here, but in Kenya it's like really emphasized for you to have them. And we had these geometrical sets, and in the geometrical sets we had like little dividers, sharp dividers to help you like draw a circle. And so I took one of the dividers and I went to the bathroom. I literally ran to the bathroom, and I had a bandana on my head, and when I went to the bathroom, I took the bandana and I put it over my mouth. You know, the things you see in movies? It's so funny. I really thought I was doing something, but I took it out of my head, I put it on my mouth, and I started to cut on my veins. I started to really try to, you know, just kind of get like a deep one. I'm so sorry. This is not funny, but looking back at it, it was like, girl, what was you doing? You know what I mean? And so a girl that was kind of my friend, but not really, because she used to hang out with that group, she saw me running out of class crying, and she came running after me. And so like 3 minutes later, I heard her coming in, and she was like calling my name. I didn't answer, I didn't want to answer, and I was just crying. And she comes in and she starts banging on the door, telling me to open the door. Obviously I want to open the door, and I just keep trying to cut to my veins, especially it was my left hand. And so because she saw that I wasn't responding, she went and got help, and when she came back, I hadn't really done too much damage, so they got me out of the bathroom. You know, someone climbed over from the neighboring toilet and jumped into my toilet area and pushed out the door, and they took me to the nurse, and I was just stitched up, and it was all good. But that was the first attempt that I remember that I had at actually trying to kill myself, because I didn't really understand why I'm alive. Because the rejection that I felt from my family and my brothers and my mom and everybody else, except for my dad, made me feel so invisible and unlovable. Like they were out of my reach, because it's like I had to pick and choose who I could love. And I'd chosen to love my dad, and like, because I'd chosen that, then now automatically, you know, that's gone. And so it just all came flooding back, and that's the moment where I really felt like God came in. It wasn't like a big bang theory type of thing. Like, it wasn't, I said that so wrong. It wasn't like a big distinguishing, you know, moment, but it was a moment where I felt God. It was a little moment that I felt God, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna trust God, and I'm just gonna even though I didn't even know what that meant, you know, I said I'm gonna trust God, and I'm just gonna do this. I'm just going to keep pushing. And so that's exactly what I did. I remember I started to have this little Bible that I would have everywhere I went, and it would be in my desk, it'd be at home. At home was like my dorm, and I used to have it literally everywhere I went. I would read verses, not understand a thing, but I would just pray and say, thank you, God, for letting me read this, and thank you for, I accept this, you know. And so fast forward, I moved to Canada when I was 14. I actually turned 14 when I got to Canada in May, because we got here in May of 2017. May 10th, and my birthday is on the May 20th. And so I turned 14, And I actually didn't know when we moved. I actually didn't know we were gonna stay in Canada. My mom just said that we're gonna go for a conference, and I was like, sure. Like, I didn't even know Canada was a place. Let me just be so honest with you, because America, you know, the USA, UK was the only places that, you know, were advertised the most. So I was like, okay, Canada, like, what is that? And so we literally left, and I forgot to mention that we decided to stay here because we realized that back in Kenya it was a bit more dangerous for us, because what had happened was that my dad had started to be very controlling. He had tapped my mom's phone. He had all the access to her messages and stuff, and he had people following us. He knew where we lived. He would come to see me in school and, like, you know, just put on a persona, you know, nice suit, you know, nice shoes. And that was basically my life. And so it got to a point where he would have people like stake out at our house and you know, just stay there and not, you know, not really do anything, just watching us. And we just didn't feel safe. We just didn't feel like we had anyone to talk to, because in Kenya people are really corrupt. Like, the police is really corrupt. You actually cannot rely on anyone if you do not have power in that country. And that's really sad to say, but that's just the reality. And so when we came here, we were thinking about it. My mom was like, I think it's best if we stay here, just get a fresh start, you know, because I know you guys have been traumatized and stuff like that, and I just want you guys to have a place where you can actually be yourselves. And so that's when we decided to stay. So we came here, everything was all good. But it was really hard for us because we just did not, like, my dad had left an imprint on all of us, right? So the way we talked to each other, the way we communicated, would fight all the time. There was so much dysfunction, manipulation to get what we wanted, yelling, shouting, you know, grudges that would last up to a month, you know. And so I remember the communication got so bad that, like, we got to a point where no one was talking to each other, and my mom was like the peacemaker in the family. She would always be the one who would be like, okay, like, guys, let's talk about this. But even her, she had her flaws, you know. So nobody was perfect. Nobody in that family, like, knew that, wanted to admit that they were wrong or take accountability, you know, all that. It was out the window. And so we were living at a shelter at the time, and I remember living in paradise because I was like, listen, they giving us gift cards to go shop. Like, life was good. Like, you don't have to worry about food. You're fine. You know, you have a place to sleep. You have food to eat. You have a mall that you can walk 10 minutes to. I was good. Like, I was not complaining about anything. But I don't want to go through the whole thing, so I'm just going to skip to the good parts. So we moved out of the shelter, we found our own place in Niagara Falls, and that's when things started to escalate because my sister, remember how I said when you're abused, you can either become the abuser or the victim? So my sister had started to be very abusive emotionally, and honestly, looking back at that, I'm not excusing her behavior, but she was one of the three of us that went through a lot with my dad. There was even a day that at the time she was living with my dad because it was closer to school and he could drop her off and pick her up. And so at the time she had a boyfriend, and she had her boyfriend over that day, and they were just upstairs watching a movie or, you know, just chilling. And my dad is extremely strict. And so she didn't like the fact that she had a boy over because she wouldn't tell him who she had over. So my dad automatically got, you know. My dad found out about it because the houseboy told my dad that she had a boy over. And so my dad came upstairs and he literally pushed down the door. And he didn't even want to hear it. He got so violent, he started to beat her. And at the time, she was on her period. So he beat her so bad that she actually couldn't even walk, and she beat the guy that was there. Literally, okay, this is a little funny. She beat the guy out of there, and he ran out of there without any shoes or socks. Like, it was that bad. And so we had to come and pick her up and take her to the hospital and take her to the police, but he had already bribed the police, so there was nothing we could do. And so that's just one of the experiences that she had gone through that we know of, you know. So she had gone through a lot that we didn't even know of, and so she started to be the abuser, and it started to really disconnect everyone in the family. We didn't know how to talk to her, we didn't know how to approach her, and so it was kind of like she was in isolation most of the time, and we didn't really bother to talk to her, because every time we felt like we wanted to talk to her, it would always turn ugly. And so that happened with her, and it kind of now created like groups in the family. So I started to grow closer to my mom, and my brother started to go closer to my sister, and so there's a disconnect because none of us were willing to come to each other and talk to each other about what we're going through. And so we got to our own place, we had everything we wanted, and that's when things started to get harder, because she kind of I'm not to say this, but she kind of, you know, when she would reiterate my dad's character towards every one of us, and that was quite traumatic because it's the one thing we were trying to run away from. And so I remember even going to school, I would always be so anxious because I was so scared of like, okay, I have to go home and act this way and like tell her that I love her and like show that I care about her. And so it was a hard time living in that situation again. And that's when I started to come to an understanding of who I was, and that's when I started to see God more clearly. And so one thing that I struggled with was, why did you let this happen to me? To God, because, you know, people had said that, you know, God is good, he's faithful, and although I love God, I couldn't shake the perception that I had of him. It was almost like I saw him through the lens of my dad, but I also saw him as God, like that's God, but I didn't know what a father really felt like, so that's the only perception that I had. I had this urge to just start reading my Bible more and start praying more, and that's exactly what I did. And I had an encounter with God where I literally felt him convicting me so deeply, and that's when, after that day, is when I believe I started to get into my healing period, because after that day, I felt spiritually closer to God. And so there'd be moments where I'd just be like eating with my family or like just chilling, watching TV, and I would literally feel like I want to cry. Like I didn't know what it was, but so much emotion. I felt like I had a wail that I needed to let out, you know? And so in those moments, I'd be like, Mom, I don't know like what's going on with me. It's been days, I'm feeling like this. She'd be like, I think you should just go upstairs, put some worship on and pray. And that's exactly what I did. And when I did that, it was so crazy how much pain I would let out. And it would be a continuous thing. Like one day I would cry for hours on hours, and the next day it would be the same thing over and over. And as I'm crying, God is revealing to me, like, you always felt like you had to prove yourself. Perfectionism. You felt invisible. You felt unlovable. You felt like you were unseen. You felt like the only way to earn love, like everything was just flooding back. Everything I had tried to run away from literally met me face to face. In that moment, I was like, I felt so much peace in the midst of my pain, which is so weird. It was the first time where I felt I was being held, I was caught, he caught me. But at the same time, I'm feeling so much pain. And so that's when I started to get out of this depressive period, and I said, you know what, that day actually I really had planned to take a night and do what I had to do. I remember saying to myself, the only thing stopping me right now is you, God. And that day I went to bed, and that was that. The next morning I wake up with so much peace, and it was something that was so foreign to me. And that's why I was like, this is different. Like, this is not something I've experienced. I don't know why this feels like this, but it's like overnight my depression had just had disappeared, I'd really seen God do that to me and through me. Why not just give my life to him, really? Why not just surrender completely? I'm tired of doing this on my own. And that's when I was like, yeah, this is, I know I'm good. The peace that I felt, the overwhelming joy, the uncertainty but safety that he gave me was something that I had never ever experienced in my life. And so that just pushed me closer to him. And when I completely submitted, because he had proven himself to me so many times, I was like, you know what? I don't need to delay. Like, when you tell me to do something, I'm gonna do it. And that's exactly what happened. I remember I had friends. He would tell me to cut them off. I cut them off. He would tell me to stop talking to this guy. I would stop talking to this guy. He would tell me to do this every morning, do this every morning, do this every night when you go to bed. I would do it. Like, everything that God revealed to me to do, I did it without hesitation. And I feel like that was part of the reason why my life shifted so fast, because I went from knowing myself a little bit, just having a little bit of confidence and, yeah, this is prophecy, to being like, yes, this is me. I'm a woman of God. I have been called to do this and this and this. He's telling me to do this. He told me to pray for this person. Like, I was like, what is going on? Am I becoming pastor? Hey, I rebuke. But it's just, it was crazy to me who I was becoming. And so after I just kept going, 2021, I got baptized in July. And that's when I started to be so spiritually involved with God. Like, the intimacy started to grow. And every morning in my devotion, I would even say like 30 minutes wasn't enough. I'd stay there for literally like an hour and a half and just talk to God. And I would grow. That time I would grow. I would even have Bible studies where it actually made sense to me. The words made sense, and I would feel the Holy Spirit. He kept proving himself to me over and over. His presence, at the time, I associated with a feeling, and I relied on that feeling heavily. And so fast forward to the end of 2021 is when I had really felt like I'm where I'm supposed to be. When you're in alignment, you feel like this is what it feels like. And every time I would slip up or slightly just go off course, I would always feel something in my spirit that would be like, okay, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And that's when I knew, okay, I'm finally here. And when I recognized that, I was like, this is not what I thought God was like. Everything that I've been taught about who God was, complete opposite to what I experienced. People said that God was religious. You have to do this to get this. You have to act a certain way. You have to be a certain way. And because I had seen most of hypocrisy all my life, I was like, there's no possible way that's true for me. Like, I can't pretend to be something I'm not, And that was the messed up perception that I had of God. But when I actually got to know God for who he was and who he is, it woke me up like I was literally asleep. Like, I remember realizing, like, looking at the world from a whole different perspective. Like, what is going on? People are literally sleeping. I had to now choose between being, right now at the moment, I have to choose between being likable or being a people pleaser, and choosing like what I need to do. And in this present moment, I'm in a place where I can really say for sure that this is the best place I've ever been, that I never even thought, existed. And so it's a journey with God, and it's a constant growth journey. I'm realizing that I'm always staying to submission and never letting myself have too much pride, always being humble and sensitive to his spirit. And I am blessed, I am honored, and I am so full of so much love and so much joy because of him. So I honor my parents by recognizing who they were and why they did what they did. Looking back at my mom, she didn't really grow up in an environment where she had the right role models, and she had low self-esteem, and that's why she was in a relationship with my dad. And my dad as a kid was abused physically, mentally, and he went through a lot of violence as a child. So I honor them by looking at what they had been through and understanding their perspective and learning to love them as who they are, and love them from a place of contentment and satisfaction, that I know you did this, but I know that that's not the true you, and love them either way and forgive them. So the first thing I would say would be standards. I don't think there was any standard of any kind in the family. And for me now, as a woman of God that I am, my standards are high just because I know my value in Christ. And so the standard that, I don't deserve this, or this is not how I should be treated, or this is not how you should talk to me, or this is not how I'm supposed to, be portrayed in the family. Just having standards to understand who one is, each one of us is in God, and respecting one another as that describes the prince. What to say? But yeah, you get my point. The second thing, I said standards. The second thing would be communication. I definitely feel like there's a lot of miscommunication, and not to defend their behavior, but just to understand that a lot of people didn't feel like they were understood in the family. And so I think that did go on a lot between my parents. And I always want to, in my marriage, I want to have communication. I want to talk about things. I want you to break in front of me. I don't want you to feel like you have to hold up this persona or hold up this, man of the house. Like, you don't have to do that with me. With me, you can talk to me about what's actually going on, and we can figure it out together. And so I feel like that is one of the things that is so important. Communication, not only understanding somebody through your perspective, but understanding them through their perspective, and them vice versa towards you. The other thing I would say would be standards, communication,
boundaries.
What?
Boundaries.
Okay. The next thing I would say would be boundaries. So because of how much I've gone through, I know that there is triggers for me, and there has to be lines that need to be addressed. Like, there's things that you cannot do. There's things that we cannot let happen in the relationship. Meaning, if I set a boundary and I say, okay, if this gets to this point, I think we should just stop and come back to it later, or or stop and kind of talk in a lower tone, or do things differently. I feel like boundaries is so important because it sets the tone for the relationship, and it sets the tone, watch this, for the standard of the relationship. So I really feel like boundaries is something that just has to be in my marriage. Hi, my name is Prophecy William, and this is my testimony.
Who could love me through my highs and lows? Who could make me feel so vulnerable?